because this comes to our person of the day. And her name is, by the way, I'll tell you now, her name is Amenirdis the First. That's Amenirdis the First. Now, the first part of her name, Amun, is in reference to the main deity that both the Kushites and the Egyptians worship, Amun-Ra. Some say, and I'm not saying yes or no, but Amen is how Christians and Hebrews and some other religious people end their prayers, Amen. And some say that name goes all the way back to that particular deity. I'm not saying that it does or not, but I find it curious that that is the name, Amun-Ra, and I find it curious that this girl's name was Amenirdis the First. We'll talk about that on another occasion. But here's the thing. So how did she become powerful? Let's get to that, because I think that's important. I'm doing a lot of talking, but let's get to that. Number one, whoever was the God's wife of Amun had to designate their successor. They had to adopt a single woman who had never had children to become their successor. So Kushite had a daughter who was his daughter. Kushite was a king, so that meant that Amenirdis was a princess. So already when she was born, she had status, she had power, she had influence. But Kushite hatched a plan to convince the then existing God's wife of Amun to adopt his daughter as her successor. And she did, in fact, do that. So the first step that the Kushites took to gain power and then ultimately to rise up after 470 years of being dominated, colonized, and exploited by the Egyptians, the first step that the Kushites took to dominate and to control and ultimately to rule over the Egyptians was Kushite putting his daughter in a position that ultimately she would rise up to become God's wife of Amun. And as I told you, although she was a high priestess, that job was largely political, because the priests who lived in the southern part of Egypt essentially were like second pharaohs. They rivaled and fought with Pharaoh and had as much influence, and at times more influence than Pharaoh. So Kushite put his daughter in place. Some speculate that when she first made that trip from Napata to Thebes, which is a 700-mile journey, that she might have been a teenager. Some say that when she actually ascended from being the mentee to actually being God's wife of Amun, she was 36 years old. Now, it's interesting to note that Kushite was the first black pharaoh of Egypt, so to speak, for purposes of this conversation. But his son, Pianke, was the second. Pianke actually eventually came to Egypt with bows and arrows, and because we talked about that, the Kushites were known for being very effective and very skillful with the bow. They were sharpshooters. The land of the bow, remember we talked about that. Taseti, that means the land of the bow. They were known for that. They were recruited for that by major empires all around the world to be mercenaries because they were so excellent with their bows. But the first step to overcoming and to conquering the conquerors was not the bow. It was the daughter, the priestess, who rose up and became God's wife of Amun, which was a powerful political, spiritual, and economic position. So while her brother was ruling in a place called Memphis, which is in the northern part of Egypt, he was cool because he didn't have to worry about the religious people rising up in the south as they had done many times in the past, because his father had already put his sister in charge of that.